Good evening, everyone. I'll call this meeting of the Budget Committee to order. Ms. Donaldson, would you call the roll, please?
Deacon.
Here.
Fitzwater.
Present.
Hensley.
Present.
Kimna. Lester.
Here.
Schreiber.
Present.
Spencer.
Here.
Spicer.
Present.
Ward. Here. Wiseman.
Thank you very much. Brings us to committee discussion of the budget. And as discussed at our last meeting, have some items to share. I mean, as we knew from these past meetings, you know, there were some desire, some ask for ideas as to a plan, as to an approach for a number of these funds and how to cover a number of these priorities. I was happy to throw out sort of the first pitch to get the conversation started, and was really happy to receive a whole lot of really thoughtful, great input from everyone. It's exactly what I was hoping would happen. So grateful to my colleagues for taking a look and pitching in, and I'm happy that it has led to what I think is a really strong, in a lot of ways, in a lot of senses across these items, more or less a group proposal. That is not to say that everyone agrees with all of these items. It's simply to say that I was grateful to have a lot of input from a lot of my colleagues to go into what we're bringing up tonight. And I think what we were able to present here is a balanced and responsible team effort and proposal as to an approach. So if nobody minds, I'm just going to sort of go through this. It's a fair amount of content, and it proposes some adjustments to general fund line items. It also proposes some uses of the sales tax G gleaned funds, and it also proposes paying for some priorities with ARPA dollars. So with no further ado, on the general fund adjustment portion, what I was aiming to do was provide funding to bring back the compost services contract and to replace the economic development funding that was cut, and to pay for this new police department senior management analyst grants manager position. What I was able to come up with across the exhibits A and B that I provided that are up here, and I guess I'll just go through those on my list. I had a group of, I think it was 19 items across the administration budgets that I proposed reducing by 30%. And then I had another group of items that I proposed individual reductions for. The 30% items were office supplies in a number of areas, dues and publications in some areas, professional services in some areas, some training and education, postage, some reduction to the awards program, and miscellaneous other operating expenses. 30% of those items brought us about $25,326. And then the other items, the individual cuts that I'm proposing were several. I don't know if it's 19 exactly, but it's around 20 items. Gas in a couple of in a couple of spots, some other larger ticket individual proposed uses, and a 10% reduction in mayor and council salary. Really just to drive the point home that there's no part of this budget that I think is sacred and can't be touched for the sake of funding all of our necessary operations here. Those items came to just over $165,000. Added together, I was able to come up with $190,418 that would fund the PD senior management analyst and the economic development funding, and then have $82,321 to put towards the compost services. This is not at all a judgment as to the merits of any of these items or as to their importance or their utility. I just think it's part of our effort to maximize our use of every single dollar that is entrusted to us by the taxpayers. I also recognize that some of these items may wind up needing supplemental appropriations late next fiscal year. But all things considered at this point, I think this approach puts us on strong footing to start the year and be able to address as many priority funding items as possible. So those are the general fund adjustments. For sales tax G gleaned fund uses, what I put out there for folks to consider was initially was uses of the sales tax G gleaned funds, even all the way up to completely depleting the fund, using all of it on current needs. Again, just to start the conversation to see where people were at priority-wise. It was pretty clear from the conversations that we've been able to have over the last few days that there seems to be, in my opinion anyway, a general consensus across at least a lot of the people around this table that we wanted to take a long-term, really deliberate and planned approach to how to apply a significant portion of the sales tax G funds. So the first item that I have here is what I'm calling as a shorthand a strategic reserve of $1,469,520. It's not actually creating a new fund. This will just sit in the sales tax G fund balance, but the intent of using that shorthand is to make it clear that we are intentionally not spending those funds at this time, and that we will take our time to figure out the best way in the long-term interest of the city to apply those funds in a very deliberate way over the coming months and maybe even over the coming years. I'm not sure. So that's just over 1.4 million. Second item, Councilwoman Wiseman has a proposal that will be coming to us on Tuesday night at the council meeting for $300,000 $300,000 reimbursement to the general fund for FY22 capital projects. And because that is pending and has not yet been decided on by the council, I included it in here to be on the safe side. I wouldn't want us to try to have to scramble to figure out how to cover that at some later point. So that's in there, and that again is to aid the health of the fund balance. Keeping the mayor's $200,000 proposal for stormwater materials, keeping the mayor's proposal for $85,000 for the city hall soffit replacement. I am proposing to fund one Public Works Central Maintenance Heavy Duty truck at a cost of $56,000 and eliminate the other truck in that category that was proposed by the mayor. Proposing to fund two Public Works street vehicles, again eliminating two such vehicles from the mayor's proposal. Keeping the mayor's proposal for one street sweeper at $250,000. Proposing the application of $250,000 from sales tax G into the fire department's annual fleet replacement fund. proposing to add 3 police vehicles to the 5 proposed in the mayor's budget to fund 8 police vehicles out of this at a cost of just over $379,000. Funding just over $30,000 for fire department ballistic protection. I would propose a $55,000 reduction in Councilman Lester's pending proposal. His pending proposal says $500,000 to as local grant matching funds on the body cam, car cam item. I would propose $445,000. With the understanding that if additional funds wind up being needed, we don't know what sort of grant funding is going to come in for that. If additional funds are needed, it does not appear that they will be significant relative to the overall cost. And we could decide to take that additional funding from this sales tax G reserve. It would, I think, certainly be an appropriate use of that if we chose to do so. And then finally, $275,000 for the IT storage array. So that brings us to $3.9 million, again including the almost $1.5 million that we're holding back. Finally, there are a few other items that I think are good priorities, and I think are worthy of using our remaining ARPA dollars for. Putting just over $220,000 towards the police department locker room renovation. I know that's been sorely needed for a long time. Costs, apparently, well, all costs, just like all costs, the cost estimate for this has increased over time. I think the last number that we had when we were discussing ARPA was $150,000. This amount here of just over 220 is right about in the middle of where the current range is for that project. So I've got that. Proposing to fund Councilwoman Ward's pending proposal for the demolitions at $80,000 out of ARPA. Funding the police department shift supervisor vehicle at over $67,000 out of ARPA. And then the Public Works concrete core drill and replacement street lights, $4,000 and $12,000 apiece, proposed by Councilwoman Ward. That in total, that is just over $384,000 worth of additional ARPA spending, which I believe would leave us with just under $71,000 in allocable ARPA funds. Okay, that was a lot. I don't know if we have enough meetings left to go through each one of these items. Ms. Perry?
I may have something on the sales tax G that you did not discuss, so I want to make sure.
Okay.
The removal of the fire hose replacement, there was an email about a grant having been received for that.
Correct. That's not in my proposal.
Okay, so it should be removed then from the sales tax G because it was included as part of the mayor's budget.
As part of the mayor's budget. I think that's appropriate, yeah.
Okay.
And if we need an action on that, we can certainly do that. Mr. Krell?
Can I just also mention, just before you start having discussion, some items on perspective? We also have the health insurance deficit and the workers' compensation deficit. And for closed session on Tuesday night, we're going to give you all an update on some discussions that we've been having. And they may be a few items there that could or couldn't have an impact on some of the general fund related kind of to what the mayor may have included in her budget. So I just want to make sure that all of those, and then as you mentioned, there may be some supplementals. I think that also gives the flexibility, as we do anyway, staff does anyway, is as we're going through the year and one account may be over and one account may be over, there may have to be some adjustments among those different funds to kind of balance those out, which is something we typically do anyway throughout the year.
Thank you very much to both of you. So again, not perfect. I appreciate all the input. I think it's a good place to start and try to accomplish as much as we can with the funding that's available to us. I would propose this entire presentation as a slate, and there is no reason that if people have changes that they'd like to propose that we can't go through those one by one. But I would make that motion to adopt the spending and modifications proposed in this presentation, and I would open that now for conversation of the committee. If there is any. If there's not, then I've really budgeted too much time for the rest of this meeting. Councilman Schreiber.
One thing that I think might be something we could do, since we're trying to streamline some things, is the individual that would be involved with the grants for the police department. I wonder if, since the fire department doesn't have anybody, if that person could handle both police and fire. You know, to kind of have everything work together. I think that might be a benefit, you know, for that. So I would suggest that might be a possibility of something we could do.
Any other discussion on that particular idea? Anybody have any?
So one of my thoughts about this was that we have planner positions that aren't filled, and to me, those really do a lot of the groundwork and know about writing grants. I think we would be better off funding planner positions and really designate individuals in the other departments like police and fire and maybe some other departments as content experts that would be a resource for grant writing. That would be a more efficient, effective way to approach grants. Right now, there's a lot of money out there in grants, and so I think we certainly need to have staff to leverage that opportunity.
Anyone else have any comments on Councilman Schreiber's point or Councilman Lester's comments? Councilman Spencer.
I think it would be wise for us to kind of pump the brakes on adding any additional staff until we get the Evergreen study back, and possibly even let the work be done with the Citizens Committee for the efficiency and performance audit as well. You know, the grants are kind of a double-edged sword, quite frankly. They induce some requirements upon the city that sometimes have a long-term cost that's not really realized for years to come. So I would just, and really we don't have a number yet for the compression issue that we all know, that we've all known since 2016, that's in existence. So you know, why would we want to keep adding more additional staff that compounds that problem of being able not to be able to afford the compression issue? This city has not grown since 1997, since our last annexation grab. Well, I shouldn't say grab, it's probably not a very good word. But since our last annexation in 1997, we had 355 employees. We have over 436 now. That doesn't include the part-time employees. So I think we really need to get a grasp of how we're going to staff and function, and you know, that takes into account of having, you know, that citizens group have that that RFP go out and hopefully get some good information from that. So I'm supportive of combining a couple of those positions. I think I've had some discussions with other councilmen just with that same idea, Councilman Schreiber. So I think it does have a lot of merit, but I would just feel more comfortable with holding off on adding any additional staff until we get some key information back. Thank you.
Mayor Turgeon.
Sorry. Thanks, Councilman Spencer. And while we're talking about that topic, I wanted to just mention too, in my letter that I mentioned the importance of addressing the final findings of the Evergreen Solutions salary study update. And it says, I believe it is extremely important to include some kind of funding for this item since we are currently paying for a study. And like you said, we'll have to see what the outcome of that study is so that we'll have some data then in front of us to make some other decisions. But that is an item that will also need to be addressed at some point in the budget as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Anyone at all, not just on any other item within this proposal?
So, I was just curious as to, on the sales tax G, why you were eliminating certain of the mayor's proposals, which I'm sure in proposing those, she interacted with department heads to see what was priority. Why those particular vehicles are proposed?
Those, again, these were not judgments as to merits. I assume that everything that's proposed by a department head is deemed by them to be a high priority for the functioning of their department. What I was attempting to do was, with this proposal, arrive at a strategic reserve dollar amount that seemed to be within the comfort zone of most of the people who shared an opinion. So, I mean, really, that approach explains pretty much every tweak I have proposed across the entire budget.
So, yeah, let's maybe talk about that. I mean, I agree with having a strategic reserve or balance fund related to the infrastructure sales tax. I think if we're going to do that, then we need to have our budget projections for infrastructure be more accurate, not so conservative as we have been. I kind of understand us being more conservative, given that we had no fund balance or anything, that if we had a downturn. But if we're going to have some reserve, which I think we should, I think it goes together to have that projection more close to what we have for our other sales tax projections.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And I don't know what the appropriate number is. I think this may be more than we need, but I agree we should have a reserve fund.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I was operating under the $3.9 million estimate, understanding, of course, that actual might wind up higher than that, and was simply trying to address as many of the priority items across as many of the departments as possible. Councilman Fitzwater.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I don't feel uncomfortable with the amount of the reserve. I mean, between ARPA and the additional dollars we've spent, not including our budget, I mean, just ARPA and the additional dollars, that's about a $10 million advancement in our expenditure over the last few months. So I'm not uncomfortable with the 1.4. I know you and I talked about it verbally. Can you walk me back through what items were included in that 1.4? I think I've found all of them. I know it was the additional street division projects of 560,000. Is that accurate?
I'd have to go back and find those original
Okay, that's
sheets.
fine. I've got it
Yeah.
to about 1.3 million. I'm just trying to figure out what I missed in there that we're
Yeah.
putting in. Again, I'm not uncomfortable with the number. I'm just trying to.
Yeah, I mean, if memory serves, I think in that very first iteration that I put out there, I think we had like 560 for streets, I think 204, 429 for additional stormwater
Right.
stuff. And then, so that was public works. And then I think I started with probably 150 for the locker room for the police. I think we were going to try to put some additional amount towards the burn building. I think I started at in the $200,000 to $300,000 range, and as we just went through, we just kind of as a group continued sculpting the product. So I think that there were, and then you have the public works vehicles that we've already discussed.
That was about 160,000.
Yeah, well, 160 for two of them, and then
Then the
I
fleet-
think got our
fleet
numbers.
Fund is down about 100,000.
What's that?
The fleet fund is down about 100,000.
Right. Yeah. The full requested funding for fleet replacement, I think, started at 350, and then to try to make things fit, we took that to 250.
Okay, I'm not disputing it.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable with the number. I was just trying to back myself into where, and like I said, I've got it at about 1.3, so there's something I'm missing, but again, thanks.
Oh,
I
happy to-
appreciate your work on it.
Oh, happy to go over the numbers. Yeah, I mean, we also had the streetlights and the drill. I mean, that's only 16. The shift supervisor vehicle for police. We had demolitions, police locker room. Those are some of the, I don't know if you included those in your number. Yeah.
I'll get to it, but.
I just don't happen to have that sheet with me right now.
Well, the bigger message is, I appreciate the fact that you recognized some of the comments I made last week and took it to heart, and I appreciate that we are putting some away. Like I said, we have spent about 10 million over and above what we would anticipate in our budget. We've got some other potential outstanding opportunities, so I think it's never bad to have a little bit tucked away. I do agree it should not be tucked away for 3 or 5 years, and I do agree that if we can get a more realistic projection as we move forward, and I'm not opposed to being conservative, but I mean, the better we can get that number, it gives us flexibility to invest. I mean, I know we've started our street overlay project. Unfortunately, we had to take projects out of that list just because of costs this year, and hopefully next year we can go back to people and maybe do a little bit of additional, so.
Yeah.
I appreciate the work that you've done on this.
Well, I appreciate those comments, and I appreciate your work. I mean, and your suggestions and requests last meeting and over the last several meetings, just for a plan and approach, were completely appropriate and have helped this process a lot. I was perfectly happy to, again, throw the first pitch out there at an amount that I thought would be useful to sort of calibrate where the group's comfort level would even out at, and I think that worked well in this process. I think the numbers fit together, and I think the amount that we're holding back is a smart amount. So thank you for your comments and for your work. Do you have something? Councilman Spencer.
So just for clarification, on line 5 of, under use, the public works vehicle is 68,000, but did I hear a different number? So,
You did. We had a conversation about that today. The mayor's budget originally included 102,000. And so once I had a chance to speak to Councilman Hensley about which item he was intending to fund, it would actually reduce. It's line 2 there on the spreadsheet behind you, removing the CM light duty truck. That was budgeted at $46,000.
okay.
Yeah, and then so it went from 68 to 56, and then the other 12 went up into that reserve line.
Okay. Okay, maybe this spreadsheet just isn't updated, the one I have, okay.
Yeah, I think there was a
I don't think there was an updated spreadsheet that was sent after we
After
had that email
Okay,
communication.
just want to make sure the numbers are jiving, but as long as you all have those, that's fine. Okay, I will have some other questions on some other particular items on the budget, not necessarily this piece, so I'll
Okay.
defer that until that time.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
Councilman Lester.
so I would ask Director Marash, so what's the impact of eliminating those vehicles from the budget, the ones that the mayor requests, those three vehicles?
Well, just generally, I think we've covered it several times that, the equipment is all old in most divisions. I think those are all 04, 05 trucks or 06, whatever. And each, the way we do it, each division has a priority within that division. But they don't we're not necessarily saying that the central maintenance divisions are a higher priority than the street division's priorities. It's just a priority for that division, so we didn't divide it that way. If that is, certainly any equipment we can buy as a city to replace this old equipment I've talked about a lot is a good thing.
Any other comments or
And-
questions?
And those trucks that we're talking about, how old are these and how long do they usually last? service?
Well, I would have to look it up exactly, but I mean, I know they're in that 05 range, up or down, that we've talked about. And there's several on the list that are like that weren't even included. But, you get 15 years out of any vehicle, as anyone knows. You're on borrowed time. I think we had a discussion some point recently, we're doing aftermarket parts, but isn't just these couple trucks. There's a whole issue there with equipment and vehicles, or trucks, I should say, not passenger vehicles, but work trucks that, they break down. We have good mechanics, but, with part situations, it's exacerbated these older vehicles. So that goes for any of the older vehicles in other departments as well. They just don't make parts for vehicles that old, so we do aftermarket if we can find them.
Thank you. And my personal perspective would be that if after careful deliberation, the council thought that the wise thing to do was devote additional funding to replace some of these vehicles, I think that this reserve amount that we're putting aside could obviously and certainly be used towards purchasing those vehicles. I think the goal here is simply to take due time to make sure that we are making an overall wise decision and good investment, for the future of the city. So, any other comments, questions? Councilman Spencer.
This just goes in relation to Councilman Lester's comment or concern about the reserve number from sales tax G. I just would like to make sure we put it on the radar that as my previous comments, we have not looked at annexation since 1997, and I think that's an important topic that we really need to have a discussion about, and I think we will in future public works meetings. But one of the projects that were listed in previous capital improvement sales taxes was the Wildwood Extension. And if anyone looks at our city boundaries now, that would be a logical path for this community to grow. And with having some of those reserve dollars in there, that would get us a start to move that project along and to at least help some potential developers that are very interested in the Fourth Ward developing in that area. So I think it's healthy, and I think it would be good for us to keep those dollars intact for potentially that project and hopefully the very near future. So, thank you.
Okay, and
Councilman
I
Lester.
just wanted to give a little context. So if our sales tax projections, I think they're like at the half cent is like 5.6 per year. A 1 million amount would be about 17 point. I gave that to you. I think 17.8% or something. So anyway, I want to have a reserve. Picking this number, I think I would certainly be comfortable with a little lower number. It'd be comparable to our balance fund. But anyway.
Appreciate that. Any other comments, questions, concerns, suggestions? Councilman Spencer.
Just a quick question. So Councilman Lester had some proposals too. Are you going to go over those as well, or to explain
So-
those?
Sorry, related to He had other things that that aren't on my list, or he had something else?
Yeah, your email, Councilman Lester.
Yeah, I did email, and I didn't have a chance to put a detailed narrative to it. I'd kind of like to do a little more detail, but we could discuss things, I guess. One of the things I wanted to, I guess, point out was certainly there are a large amount of the items that, like gas and, you know, chemicals and some other things that, yes, we could reduce those. They've already been scaled back, I know, from original proposals. And I think with inflation, we know that we're gonna need that money. But yes, we could fund them at a lower level and then have a supplemental later on. I prefer to do budgets more realistically, frankly. I've been in situations where that was approached by the powers that be, and as a manager, it does cause a good bit of stress. So anyway, that was Exhibit C on the email that I sent, and that was the total amount was $138,500 of those identified items. Most of it gas and chemicals. But anyway, I just want us to know what we're doing, and to know that we're likely to have these expenditures later on.
Thank you for that. And I do share some of your concern with some of the projections. It does kind of seem like that we're a little more conservative on the capital improvement sales tax projections versus the general fund sales tax projections. Am I looking at that maybe wrong, or is that?
I don't know that it's the fact that we're more conservative, but we have consistently used, I believe, the $5.6 million as the number that when we originally put that to a vote of the people was discussed. So I don't think that typically that has changed over the 5-year iteration, whereas with the general fund sales tax, we would typically look at the history, we would do analytics on coming up with our projection there.
So it's different analytics and different trends that you look at for the different taxes that we collect, or revenues that we
I'm
collect.
saying that for the capital improvement tax, when that was proposed for a vote, we discussed revenue of $5.6 million. That's what we would historically use over the course of that entire 5-year iteration. It would not change. It would not be based on analytics. It would be based on the $5.6 million that was originally put out as part of that.
It's more of a historical number, and I think it's conservative, yeah. I mean,
Whereas with the general
Yeah.
fund, we are truly doing analysis on an annual basis and looking to see what we believe that is going to come in at. With the capital improvement, it's really been a fixed number for each of the 5 years.
if I could, so for example, on a year-to-year basis, we kind of have an idea on inflation, for example. But when we're looking out 5 years, we may not. So, you know, we try to balance that off. But
Yeah, just to add a little context and my own personal perspective, I mean, the dynamic here that hasn't really been brought up is that a few weeks ago, we correctly and necessarily devoted significant additional funds to employee salaries. And we are attempting to continue that salary increase into the next fiscal year, you know, devoting a few more percentage points of our general fund balance to that worthy effort without really increasing available revenues. So what we are attempting to do here is continue funding that important priority while also keeping all of the other plates spinning as well. I would love to be able to budget more in every single one of these items than we will probably need and then have a surplus at the end of the year. That's an ideal way of budgeting. In this instance, yeah, the gas, the chemicals, the larger ticket items, it's perfectly possible that, I mean, even though where I've proposed those reductions does not take them, I think in most cases, significantly below the general range that actual spending has been in the last 3 years. In some cases it is, slightly below. But at the very least, they have not been slashed dramatically relative to the entire year's funding, and in all of those lines should get us very, very, very far into the year before we even need to start looking at supplemental appropriations potentially. So yeah, in an ideal budgeting environment, I would absolutely join you in putting as much money into every single one of these items and then some as we could possibly need in a given year. Unfortunately, that is simply not where we find ourselves, in my opinion. So, any other comments or questions, Councilman Spencer?
Yeah, sorry to be taking the majority of the time here. So with what our two hopes or task was trying to get the yard waste contract to be filled, and with the JC rep amount back to its original amount as well. We still fall short of that because of all the projected savings. We're still at $190,418. So I still believe that another option that I've been bringing up for the last 2 years is the Parks and Rec admin fee. And I appreciate you going through this holistic exercise of really looking at the budget line by line through the admin section of it, and I appreciate that and I applaud it.
Hey, Councilman Spencer, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Would you mind if we finish conversation on this before,
Oh, sure.
before we launch into the parks thing?
Yeah, sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Sorry
that'd
about
be
that.
fine. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions on what I have on the table here, this proposal?
No,
No.
my only comment is just I want us to be realistic about what we're doing, and the projections. I'm not, that's all. And I did send an email late. I want to put some more comments and thought to it. There are some things that I think are very important that you've cut substantially that I think would be problems given. But I want to give more information before we talk about it.
Okay, and even things that we might vote on and approve or modify during these meetings can certainly be adjusted at future meetings. None of this is final until we approve it twice, once out of this committee and then once at council. So, any other comments, questions, suggestions? Seeing none, I would renew my motion to approve this slate of adjustments affecting the general fund budgets mentioned, the sales tax G glean funds, and the additional ARPA spending. Is there a second? Thank you. Is there any additional conversation on this point?
Okay, so basically that's you're making that motion as a framework, or I'm not sure
No.
what we're.
I'm making this motion to make these changes, but none of this is in stone. None of this is immutable, certainly during the course of the budget process. So by that I mean, if a majority was to approve these changes tonight, that doesn't keep us from coming back at a future meeting and changing the changes. Does that make sense? That's my view anyway. I don't think we're making any of this permanent tonight. Any other comments or questions on this particular motion? Seeing none, Ms. Donaldson, please call the roll.
Deacon,
Here.
is that an aye? Fitzwater,
Aye.
Hensley,
Am I allowed to just say present? Is that okay? No, aye.
Kimna, Lester,
No.
Schreiber,
Aye.
Spencer,
Aye.
Spicer, Ward, Wiseman.
Aye.
Okay, the ayes appear to have it. So those changes will be made and reflected in future budget docs on this as we proceed. And thank you all very much for your time, and especially thanks to staff for entertaining all of this. It's an enormous number of lines, and I kind of apologize, but is what it is. Okay. Councilman Spencer, would you like to continue on the line of discussion you were on before I so rudely interrupted you a moment ago?
Thank you. And I don't take it personally, so don't lose any sleep on it. As I was stating earlier, I think still a viable option for fairness and consistency with how our accounting practices are would be to use the same formula that other enterprise funds are currently and have been utilized for a number of years. So I guess if I could ask a couple questions of you, Ms. Sheila. Can you give us, can you explain the process of the parks versus the other enterprise funds, and what the main difference is of how the calculation is?
So the other enterprise funds, the calculated portion of the administrative chargebacks is based on the percentage of operating expenses from the last audited fiscal year, in this case FY21, as a percent of the total operating expenses across the board. That is not the way the calculation is for parks. Parks, the figure that we utilize for them is actually 5% of the park sales tax collected over the prior 12 months.
And where does that policy directive come from?
I cannot answer that question. I can tell you that in the time I've been here, 14 years, that's the way this has been done. But I don't know that I've ever seen anything in writing as far as a policy or anything in the code or the charter.
The formula that you use for the other enterprise funds, has that ever been tested, or has that ever been challenged to where that's, not an accurate formula that is utilized?
It's not a methodology that's uncommon. Lots of municipalities have some kind of administrative chargeback. Ours is not unusual in the manner that we calculate it. The methodology has been tested as part of a transit FTA triennial review. We have those every 3 years, a triennial review. Not this year, but the past review, so 3 years ago, there was some discussion about the methodology that we used. The FTA had a third-party audit firm of their choosing that tested the methodology, and the only thing that they really came back with was the argument that they were unsure if the mayor and council's administrative expenses should be included as part of the distribution, for lack of a better term. Other than that, they were not unsatisfied with any way that we were calculating the administrative chargebacks or the methodology that we were using to do so.
And I think at the previous, when I brought this up a couple meetings ago, Director Spalding was going to give us an update or a presentation on what that administrative fee entails. Is that correct?
The way I understood it, we were going to start the conversations on the yard waste, how much it would cost for us to do that. I was not aware that I was needing to have any kind of presentation on the administrative chargeback. But I could certainly give you, get with our president, and we could certainly prepare a report on the administrative charges and where that goes and why that is. Sure. Why we feel the number is accurate.
And I guess as it alludes to the yard waste, do you have any information that you want to?
Chris and I, we've been working on, to do this up front and to purchase the equipment. We're looking at a pretty high cost, so we're trying to get, so we don't overstate it or understate it. We're trying to get accurate numbers from, the amount of equipment we'll need, tub grinders, front-end loaders. We have a pretty good idea of what staff costs this type of program would cost us, but we're getting closer, yes.
So it sounds like it's definitely going to be well above the $201,000 of what that would be.
For sure. I mean, just for example, a tub grinder ranges anywhere from $500,000 to $900,000.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So I think it's obviously gives us a sense of value that what All Seasons is offering us is pretty good, and therefore, if that's what this council desires to continue that service, I think obviously having the fair and consistent admin fees being calculated, I think serves purpose of what I was trying to accomplish. So I would propose that be voted on as well as a funding mechanism to accomplish both those two tasks.
Was that a motion?
Yes, it was.
And what, can you restate the motion?
Just a motion to be voted on as a framework for the admin fees to be paid by Parks
Okay.
at the current formula, methodology that is currently used for all other enterprise funds.
Okay, so I'm hearing you're putting that out there tonight as a proposal. As Mr. Spalding said, they're not really,
Yeah, I'm not really,
you're not bringing it up for a vote tonight.
no.
Okay.
But I would like to have it be presented to be able to vote on. I think with his statement tonight that Parks taking that over and running that in-house is well out of the realm of possibility. So I'd really even be fine with him ceasing any more of his time wasting on it. The only way we're gonna be able to fund this service is if they pay the consistent admin fees like all the other enterprise funds are
Yeah,
being
I
paid.
think there was also a question about, not just about them standing up their own composting service, which I think everyone can understand that being extraordinarily expensive. But I think there was also a question about taking over the contract. And tonight we have put a little over $82,000 towards that contract. I think that leaves us about 120 wanting. But just wanted to remind the room that there was that additional option as well regarding taking over the contract, in my understanding anyway. So that'll be good material for future and additional discussions. Any other comments from Parks on this at this point? Thanks. Okay. Additional conversation of the committee. Councilman Lester.
So I would just say on this issue, I think to show that that's not an appropriate administrative chargeback, it'd be incumbent upon the administrator of the city to show, why that's not. There's also within our current budget just some plug amounts in the non-departmental that Parks charges, or we put in the budget how much we pay Parks, and those are just amounts out of the air, apparently, plug amounts that have been there for years. And they're not certainly accurate, and if Parks wanted those to be accurate, they should justify that those would be accurate and trended like any other budget line item, which currently they aren't. For building and grounds maintenance, there's just a plug amount of 40,000, and for trees, it's just a plug amount of 25,000, which, you know, which I don't understand, but it's, I think, all part of the same ball of wax of the admin fee being different, the chargeback.
If I could respond to that, yeah, I guess my biggest concern is that this was done without the council's approval, this administrative fee structure. This was done behind closed doors with previous mayor and previous city administrators. So that's my problem with it, that this body has never voted on an inconsistent admin fee structure versus all the other admin fee structures we have in this city. I mean, it's a little alarming that was done, but it's not surprising that there's no documentation that said this was when it was decided, how it was decided, the date and time it was decided. So I have an issue with that. So that's I guess my biggest angst. If that's what the council would like, then I think the council should vote finally that says we approve this methodology on how they arrive at their admin fees. So we can get past this year after year potential that a councilman can bring up and say, hey, we think the park should pay their fair share in admin fees. I don't know how we go about that, if that's something that we can do. I think it should have been done in 1997.
Yeah, the appropriate way to memorialize that type of decision would be to approve an ordinance, so stating. Not that it wouldn't ever be subject to amendment by the city council, but it would take an ordinance to do that.
Yeah, I like to see data upon which we base budget things on, and so yes, I think it's possible to really assess how much administrative chargebacks parks should be charged. Just like I think it's easy enough to figure out how much the city, the park should charge the city for tree and landscape. I mean, these are things that you can, you know, from expenditures that are done, you can, or random time moment studies you can do to figure out. So I'm just saying I'd like to see the basis for doing whatever we do.
Terrific. Any other conversation this evening? Councilman Spencer.
As it relates to the public safety tax, was it communicated that pension costs were going to come out of that? Any pension costs coming out of public safety tax to cover pension costs?
Related to salaries, you mean?
For fire and police out of the public safety tax? Was there going to be any component coming out of that sales tax to cover pension costs?
I'm not aware of any discussion where there wasn't going to be. As I mentioned earlier, I do have an update that I want to give council on Tuesday that may have some bearing on some of your discussions.
Okay.
But of course, that's, you know, a big part of the increase of the pension costs. But I mean, it's certainly up to council's discretion.
So like we did with the FOP, and when you gave an update, the firefighters local will be there to.
No, this is a closed session discussion.
Well, so
we're
is
not
that
to we're not to the.
So was that when the FOP discussed their contract negotiations? That was a closed session too.
I don't remember if that was a closed session or
It was a
not, but,
closed
but when
session, yes.
when we got to the point where we were still negotiating, we've got a long discussion with fire. There's a lot of things there to discuss, and I want to give an update on that.
And before we vote on that, I hope the firefighters can explain the pay plan as well, like the FOP did.
They will. Tuesday's night's not that, we're not to that point yet, in my opinion.
But just to be clear, you're stating that pension costs were part of the sale of the public safety tax. That was communicated to the public, and
Oh, I don't know.
yeah,
I don't know that there was any one way or the other.
because that's a big that's a big surprise as an expense that's coming out of that public safety tax
No.
to me. So I have some real reservations and concerns there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, discussion this evening? I'll take this opportunity to ask if there's anyone here wishing to make public comment on the budget. Seeing no one. Any other discussion? No, I will remind the room that our next Budget Committee meeting is a week from tonight, September 8th, 5:30 in this room. The council has our next meeting on Tuesday night, September 6th, next week, 6 p.m., also in this room. And if there is no other discussion tonight, go Tigers, we're adjourned. And Blue Tigers and MU.